Imagine being Prime Minister with a massive parliamentary majority, having won a landslide election just over a year ago, and yet finding yourself in such deep political trouble that credible people are openly discussing not just whether you will be ousted, but exactly how the mechanics of removing you would work. That is the absolutely extraordinary situation facing Keir Starmer right now, as polling shows Labour neck and neck with Conservatives on a catastrophic 19%, while Nigel Farage Reform UK sits comfortably ahead on 26%. We are not talking about a temporary dip in the polls or a bit of midterm turbulence. We are talking about a complete collapse in public support that has political commentators seriously examining Labour Party rules to work out the precise constitutional mechanism for defenestrating a sitting Prime Minister. The Spectator is suggesting that if Labour's fortunes do not improve in 2026, unprecedented measures could be taken by MPs, including potentially a secret ballot to select Starmer's successor. We have moved beyond speculation about whether Starmer might face challenges to detailed technical discussions about how Labour MPs would actually go about replacing him, which tells you everything about how dire his political situation has become. Quick favor. If you are absolutely fascinated by this incredible political drama where a Prime Minister who won a landslide is now fighting for survival, hit that subscribe button right now. Over 94% of you watching have not subscribed yet. It is completely free. Takes literally 2 seconds, and helps us keep bringing you these moments where British politics becomes more dramatic than any television series could ever be. Cheers if you did. Now back to Starmer's existential crisis. Let us start with those polling numbers because they are genuinely catastrophic and represent one of the most dramatic collapses in political support in modern British history. YouGov put Labour on 19% as of December 22nd, which is absolutely dire for a governing party. To put this in context, Labour won the last general election with around 34% of the vote, which gave them a massive parliamentary majority because of how the first-past-the-post system works and how the opposition vote was split. Now they are polling at 19%, which is a 15-point drop in just over a year. That is not a gradual decline. That is a political collapse of historic proportions. Being neck and neck with the Conservatives on 19% is particularly embarrassing because the Tories are supposed to be in disarray after losing power, going through leadership changes, and trying to rebuild their party after 14 years in government that ended in electoral disaster. The fact that Labour, despite being the governing party with all the advantages of incumbency and the ability to actually implement policies, is polling no better than the opposition party that was comprehensively rejected by voters just over a year ago tells you that the public is not seeing any real difference between them. They are both seen as equally unappealing, equally out of touch, and equally incapable of addressing the country's problems. But here's where it gets truly remarkable. Reform UK is polling at 26%, a full 7 points ahead of Labour. Reform, a party that until recently was primarily known as Nigel Farage's Brexit vehicle and has never held significant parliamentary representation, is now the most popular political party in Britain according to this polling. Let that sink in for a moment. A party led by Nigel Farage, who has spent decades being dismissed by the political establishment as a fringe figure, is now polling higher than both the governing Labour Party and the official Conservative opposition. That represents a complete realignment of British politics and a wholesale rejection of the traditional two-party system that has dominated for over a century. Starmer's response to this crisis has been characteristically confused and ineffective. He has tried both emulating some of Farage's stances and appeasing his left-wing backbenchers, which is a political strategy that pleases absolutely nobody and makes you look desperate and unprincipled to everyone. The Island of Strangers speech is a perfect example of this confused approach. Starmer delivered what was widely interpreted as a hardline speech on immigration and national identity, using language that critics had echoed Enoch Powell's infamous Rivers of Blood speech. The goal was presumably to appeal to voters who are concerned about immigration and might be considering voting for Reform UK. But all it achieved was alienating Starmer's own left-wing supporters who were horrified by the rhetoric while failing to win over any Reform voters who quite reasonably asked why they should vote for Starmer's imitation of Farage when they could just vote for the real thing. Then, in an apparent attempt to placate his left-wing backbenchers who were furious about the Island of Strangers speech and other perceived rightward shifts, Starmer scrapped the two-child benefit cap and announced planned £5 billion cuts to welfare. These are traditionally left-wing policy positions that appeal to Labour's progressive wing and trade union supporters. But they also completely undermine the attempt to appeal to reform voters and make Starmer look like he has no coherent political philosophy beyond desperately trying to please everyone and ending up pleasing nobody. It is political triangulation at its worst, the kind of approach that makes you look weak, unprincipled, and entirely reactive rather than having any clear vision for the country. The potential challenges to Starmer are a fascinating cast of characters who represent different factions and tendencies within the Labour Party. Where Streeting, one of the most frequently mentioned names, has been one of Labour's most impressive performers since the election. He is a health secretary and has been defending controversial NHS reforms and appearing regularly in the media to make the case for government policy. Streeting has said this government is too technocratic, which is a polite way of saying it is boring, overly focused on managerial competence rather than inspiring vision, and has failed to connect emotionally with voters. That criticism is particularly damaging because it comes from someone inside the cabinet who presumably understands a government approach intimately and has concluded it is fundamentally flawed. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, is also frequently mooted as a potential challenger. Rayner has a significant base of support among party members and trade unions, and she represents a more traditional left-wing Labour politics than Starmer's centrist technocratic approach. She would likely position herself as someone who can reconnect Labour with its working-class roots and rebuild the coalition of voters that has abandoned the party. The whispers about Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, are particularly intriguing because Miliband was previously Labour leader himself and lost the 2015 general election to David Cameron. The idea that he might return as leader a decade later is almost Shakespearean in its dramatic arc, though whether the party would actually go back to someone who already lost an election is questionable. Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, being mentioned as a potential challenger is interesting because she represents a younger generation of Labour politicians who were not part of the Corbyn or Miliband eras. She could potentially position herself as a fresh start, someone who represents a break from both the recent past and the current failing approach. The fact that there are multiple credible challenges being discussed tells you that this is not just idle speculation or media gossip. Serious people within the Labour Party are actively thinking about who comes after Starmer and positioning themselves accordingly. The suggestion that unprecedented measures could be taken by MPs if Labour's fortunes do not improve in 2026 is genuinely remarkable language. Unprecedented measures in this context means doing something that has never been done before, breaking established norms and procedures to remove a sitting Prime Minister from their own party. The Spectator suggestion of a secret ballot to select Starmer's successor is particularly fascinating because it would fundamentally change how Labour leadership contests work. Currently, the process is relatively open and involves MPs, party members, and affiliated organisations like trade unions all having a say. A secret ballot among MPs would concentrate power in the parliamentary party and allow them to remove Starmer and select his replacement without necessarily involving the wider membership. This is significant because Labour's membership tends to be more left-wing than its MPs, which is how Jeremy Corbyn ended up as leader despite having very limited support among Labour parliamentarians. If MPs could select a new leader through a secret ballot without involving the membership, they could potentially choose someone who better represents the parliamentary party's preferences rather than the membership's preferences. It would be a constitutional revolution within the Labour Party, a fundamental shift in where power lies and who gets to make decisions about leadership. The comparison with how the Conservative Party removes leaders is instructive because we have seen that process play out multiple times in recent years. Letters of no confidence are submitted to the 1922 Committee of Backbench Conservative MPs, and if a threshold is met, a leadership ballot takes place. It is a relatively straightforward process that has been used to remove Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and effectively Liz Truss, though she resigned before the formal process was completed. The Conservatives have become quite efficient at removing leaders who are not working out, which is both a strength in terms of accountability and a weakness in terms of stability and long-term planning. Labour's current process for challenging a sitting leader is more complicated and arguably more protective of the incumbent. The current occupant of number 10 would need to be presented with a challenger with the support of at least 20% of the Parliamentary Labour Party to trigger a full leadership contest. That is a significant threshold because it requires dozens of MPs to publicly declare they want a leadership election, which is politically risky because if the challenge fails, those MPs will be marked as disloyal and their careers could suffer. The written nominations would be submitted to the General Secretary of the party, and then a one-member, one-vote system is used, ensuring equal weight is given to the vote of MPs, Labour members, and members of affiliated organisations like trade unions. This system makes it quite difficult to remove a sitting Labour leader who retains support among the membership and unions, even if MPs have lost confidence. We saw this play out in 2016 when Labour MPs overwhelmingly passed a vote of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn, but he refused to resign and instead triggered a leadership contest. Owen Smith challenged Corbyn, and despite the parliamentary party being overwhelmingly against Corbyn, he won the contest comfortably. Corbyn secured 61.8% of the vote to Smith's 38.2%. The Islington North MP won the support of members at 59%, registered supporters at 70%, and trade union affiliates at 60%. The parliamentary party's views were essentially irrelevant because Corbyn had strong support among the membership and unions.